I talk a lot about different ways that you can improve your thyroid, but one of the best ways may be the thing we're going to discuss today: building more muscle mass. I know you might have already tuned out, but let me give you an idea of just how important the connection is between your thyroid and your muscle mass. Approximately 30 to 40% of your entire body mass is made up of your muscles, and these muscles are a thyroid-responsive tissue. Guess what happens if your muscle mass is less than it should be? Which, by the way, is definitely the case for many of you listening to this right now. You are going to see a big drop in thyroid function because there's less tissue to be stimulated by it. But this isn't all. In addition to being the target of thyroid hormone action, your muscles also require thyroid hormone to grow, develop, and regenerate. If your thyroid function is less than it should be, not only will you see a decrease in metabolism and muscle mass, you will also have a very hard time growing your muscles. So is your muscle mass important for thyroid function? Absolutely. But let's say that this connection still isn't very interesting to you. If I can't convince you to build more muscle mass to improve your thyroid, maybe I can convince you by showing how important it is to your weight. The more muscle mass that you have, the higher your metabolism will be, and the easier it will be for you to lose weight and stay lean. In short, building more muscle mass improves your weight, your metabolism, and your thyroid all at once. Are you interested now? The good news is that building muscle mass is not as hard as most people think, but it's also not as straightforward as most people think either. Here's how to do it. Building muscle mass comes down to two simple concepts: inputs and outputs. It requires both things, and when done correctly, they will turn your body into a muscle building, fat burning, thyroid optimized machine, the way it was intended to operate. Let's talk about the inputs first. Inputs refer to what you put into your mouth. And when it comes to thyroid patients who are trying to build muscle mass, it comes down to three things. Number one, your diet. Number two, thyroid function. And number three, the use of supplements. Numbers 1 and 2 are non-negotiable. Your diet needs to be on point and your thyroid must be optimized if you want to build muscle. Supplements are not required, but they can definitely speed up the process and make everything a whole lot faster. Let's focus on diet first. When it comes to food and building muscle mass, we have two macromolecules that we need to discuss: protein and carbohydrates. The reality is, if your muscle mass is lacking, then you are most likely not eating enough quality protein and overeating on carbohydrates. Yes, you do need both carbohydrates and protein to build muscle mass, but most people eat way more carbohydrates in the form of sugars than they need for this process. This leads to a problem that roughly 50% of the population suffers from, called insulin resistance. Your muscles are a highly metabolic tissue, which means they have a high demand for energy as well as sugar. And insulin is needed for your body to get that sugar inside of your muscle cells so they can grow. But what happens to most people is that they are resistant to the effects of insulin. And as a result, their muscles can't get the sugar that they need to grow. In a sense, insulin resistance causes a starving of the muscle tissues because even though there's plenty of energy floating around in the body, the muscles can't get it. The solution to this problem is actually very simple. Eat more protein. Most people automatically assume that if sugar is the problem, then reducing sugar intake will solve that problem. And while there's definitely truth to that statement, it's far better to not only reduce your intake of sugar, but replace it with protein instead. If you think about it from the perspective of putting priority on protein, then you don't really have to worry about sugar as much. Here's why. Protein is a very satiating macromolecule, which means the more of it that you consume, the more control you will have over your appetite. And the more control that you have over your appetite, the easier it will be for you to limit your intake of sugary, unhealthy foods. In a sense, increasing your intake of healthy protein will almost automatically cause a decrease in your intake of carbohydrates. You simply can't fill your body up with as many carbohydrates as you used to if you consume high amounts of protein. So don't think about it from the perspective of carbohydrates. Think about it from the perspective of eating more protein. How much protein do you need? At a minimum, you should aim to get 60 grams of protein per day from animal sources, or 100 grams of protein from plant sources if that's your preference. The source of protein that you consume matters because not all proteins are created equal. Each protein source contains a different ratio of amino acids, and not all of the protein is absorbed or digested when you consume it. In addition, some amino acids are great for building muscles and others not so much. So you could be eating a diet that's high in protein, but getting the wrong ratio of amino acids, which means that it won't really help you build muscle. Collagen protein is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Its amino acid composition is great for improving gut health, bone health, cartilage health, and even skin health, but it's just not as great for building muscle mass. All of this just means that if you prefer to get your protein sources from plants, you are going to need to consume more protein to get the same benefits as somebody who primarily gets all of their protein intake from animal sources. The absorption rate varies from source to source, but you can expect to absorb somewhere around 95% of protein from animal sources and around 60 to 70% of protein from plant sources. This isn't a problem, it's just something you need to be aware of. And this 60 gram to 100 gram range that I just mentioned is really just the bare minimum. My personal recommendation for optimal muscle building capacity is to consume 1 gram of protein per gram of body weight based on your ideal body weight. So if you are somebody who weighs 150 pounds, but your ideal body weight is 130 pounds, then you would want to consume 130 grams of protein each and every day. Some people, women especially, struggle to get their protein in each and every day. But I can promise you, if you can get up to this level, you won't need to worry about your sugar or carbohydrate intake. You will be so full from all the protein that you eat that sugary sweets won't even be on your mind. But this begs the question, how can you consistently get this amount of protein in each and every day? This is an important question because unlike fats and sugar, your body can't really store protein. The only tissue that stores protein are your muscles, and you don't want to tap into your muscles to get that protein if you need it. As a result, you will have to consume protein every single day. And doing this is actually quite easy. Focus on lean meats, fish, and eggs if you prefer animal sources, and lentils, pea, beans, hemp, and chia if you prefer plant sources of protein. As always, you'll have to experiment with different sources of protein to see how you respond. But you will be able to figure out what your body needs with a little bit of trial and error. And if you are somebody who is having trouble getting your daily protein intake in every single day, then you can always make up the difference with protein powders. Whey-based protein powders do contain a complete array of amino acids for muscle building, but they aren't always as well tolerated by thyroid patients. For this reason, I think plant-based protein powders are better if you are somebody who has a thyroid problem. But you will need to get a blend of plant-based proteins including hemp, chia, and pea if you want to match the amino acid profile of whey protein. So if you are somebody who is using a plant-based protein powder, just keep this in mind. The amount of protein that you consume every day is very important, but you can't neglect the next thing we need to discuss, which is thyroid function. Remember, you need the right inputs and outputs if you want to build muscle, but you can be doing everything correctly and still not build muscle mass if your thyroid is not functioning optimally. If you recall from the very beginning of this conversation, I said that you need optimal thyroid function for your muscles to grow, develop, and regenerate. This means you're going to have a very hard time building muscle mass if your thyroid is underperforming, which is the problem that most of you listening to this right now face. The solution? You need to optimize thyroid function with either natural treatments or thyroid medication or ideally a combination of both. It doesn't matter how you increase thyroid function, you just need to make sure that it's normal and not too high or too low. This is a whole other conversation in itself. So I won't go into extreme detail in this video right now, but what you need to know is that most thyroid patients do not have optimal thyroid function, even if they've been told that their thyroid lab tests are quote unquote normal. The good news is that there is always a way to optimize your thyroid function. And I have multiple videos discussing how to do that if you want to do it with thyroid medication or if you want to do it the all-natural way with natural therapies. I'll put the links to those videos in the description below if you're interested in checking them out. Just remember not to neglect this step if you have a thyroid problem. Now that you understand what inputs are needed, we can talk about outputs. And by outputs, what I'm really referring to here is exercise. Exercise is a 4-letter word to many thyroid patients because their thyroid problem often lends to the symptom of fatigue. And let's face it, it's really hard to exercise if you don't feel like you have any energy. But let me flip this idea on its head by suggesting that you can't afford not to exercise if you have a thyroid problem. The reason for this is that exercise can paradoxically cause an increase in your energy levels, assuming you are doing it correctly. 3 things happen when you do the right type of exercise that are particularly beneficial to thyroid patients. Number 1, you will stimulate muscle growth. This will help you build muscle mass and provide a target for thyroid hormone action. This will help you to increase thyroid function and reduce thyroid-related symptoms. This is obviously the big benefit that I've been trying to discuss this entire time, but it's not the only benefit. Number 2, you will see an increase in your basal metabolic rate, which will help with weight loss. Weight gain is obviously a huge problem for anyone who has low thyroid function, and exercise will help with this issue. And number 3, you will see benefits to vitality, fatigue, and energy levels. This meta-analysis of over 81 studies highlights this perfectly. Quote, "Our analysis revealed exercise to decrease the feelings of fatigue by a small effect, increase energy by a small to moderate effect, and to increase the feeling of vitality by a moderate effect." Vitality is a term used to describe your overall feeling toward life. The more vitality that you have, the better. If you have a thyroid problem, the question is not whether or not should you exercise, but which exercises are best. And the reality is that you can build muscle mass with a lot of different types of exercises. But I do think some are better than others. For most thyroid patients, lightweight resistance training is what I find to be the most productive. Lightweight resistance training just means that you're doing less weight with more repetitions. And this form of training can be differentiated from heavy resistance training, which is just the use of heavier weights. Lightweight resistance training is great because it keeps your heart rate in the right zone. This provides additional benefits to your thyroid by itself and still provides the stimulus that your muscles need to grow. In a perfect world, you would undergo lightweight resistance training for 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 5 times per week. If you can do this consistently while increasing your intake of protein and decreasing your intake of carbohydrates, you will see a big benefit to your thyroid in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. And if you don't believe me, give it a try and report back here. If you are somebody who has a thyroid problem and you are trying to lose weight, I'd recommend checking out this video next. It discusses the most common mistakes that thyroid patients make when they are trying to lose weight.